Oh, okay, I'll take the middle class.
Same here, you know. I'm basically a boat bum, and you know, I like a good pasta meal and so on, and I'm not particularly aggressive, and there's just interesting things to do in the universe, and these guys are getting in the way. Apparently, we're at that point in planetary consciousness where this issue is going to be dealt with over these next few years. They know it as well as a lot of us. Their language really does betray that.
And that's where we get into, we're actually going to start getting into a revolution. When do you think the actual...
Well, we're going to see it with the refuseniks. We're going to see people who are being oppressed and suppressed and repressed by the powers that be for their stance on the vaccine. This is going to create, as Che Guevara says, the best thing you can do to create revolution is to poke the government so it starts oppressing people, and then you'd start recruiting out of the oppressed. And that's what's going to happen here. Plus, we're going to have the combination of the dollar dying at the global level, putting pressure on the food supply here, at the same time that our economy takes this next level of hit with the problems with the derivatives and the dollar itself. It's you know, we don't really produce a whole lot here in the United States. We have a, quote, industry that is the financial industry that is producing and exporting these derivative things, and it's pretty much done, and no one would be buying them in any quantity in the future. The argument that the planet can't afford to get rid of the dollar because some 64% of all of the wealth of the retirement systems of the planet is stored in dollars is bogus. It's stored as digits, and those digits are getting shifted around all the time. Rumors are out now that China has reduced its total exposure to less than $700 billion. At some point, they won't care about it anymore, and they'll chuck in with the rest of the guys and reject the dollar. We're seeing that process develop now. When that occurs, the shock is going to be huge here in the illusionary world of the veneer of an American empire supported by the dollar. It's very much a situation of, if you read the decline and fall of the Roman Empire, and you get into the period of time of the debasement of the currency and the situation they had with the strange ruling class and the hyper-elite, it just goes on and on with the same kind of language for the same things we're experiencing. So there's very little reason to suppose that we won't suffer the same fate. And that fate will actually come upon our citizens in a fairly rapid order once the dollar starts cascading out. So it wouldn't surprise me, for instance, that if we had a 10-day period of international crises and the dollar was rejected in some spectacular fashion on the 4th or 5th of November, that within months we would have all kinds of, within probably 60 days, we would have all kinds of social disruptions here in the U.S., relative to that dollar going. And these social disruptions, from the viewpoint of Nancy Pelosi and her ilk, would seem to be revolutionary in nature.
And that's where, when do you think we're actually going to start seeing, for lack of a better word, bullets fly? I noticed you said something about January, things are going to really escalate.
January through March is a period of heavy repression, heavy response from the government or from the powers that be. It wouldn't surprise me to see that the context change on the 29th of December would be such a period. You know, as I say, I would not be surprised. I'm not forecasting that because we don't have enough detail level for that particular day to suggest that this is when, or what's going to arise in that context change. But such a thing as the resumption of the American Revolution against the powers that be would indeed fit the parameters of a long-simmering, suddenly bursting into fire kind of issue. And we do have language that shows that through the first 6 months of 2010, the populace of the United States does not do well relative to the oppression coming from the powers that be. It turns for us. It turns for the revolution on behalf of the planetary populace in July of 2010, but those 6 months are going to be really a nasty, ugly period of time. And before we get there, we're going to have this whatever, you know, this giant dollar crash or whatever. And you know, it's like, okay, I'm a raving loon with my forecast here, but we're right frequently enough that we even pay attention ourselves. And there are such strange things going on as, giant homeless camps in the U.S. that are just not reported. People living in parking lots and in sewer drains and all kinds of arrangements just to try and squeak by. And that populace, it can't really be ignored. It's starting to show up in mainstream. And a lot of us are going to join it. When the dollar crashes, we might see a doubling within weeks of our unemployment rate, simply because of the ripple effect through all of these rather diverse layers of interconnection within service industries and those little areas of manufacturing. Suddenly if the dollar collapses, then our goods become greatly cheap, but it becomes prohibitively expensive to import any kind of raw material. And at that point, then everything starts breaking down in the just-in-time system, and things get really wacky because we don't have the cushion of warehouses. When you think about it, if you're a retailer of some kind and you've got a big warehouse, and say you're selling women's shoes, and there's a financial crisis, and all of a sudden you can't get material. Well, you're a shoe manufacturer. But if you've got a big warehouse, well, you've got a cushion there, and you can exist for X number of days, weeks, or whatever, without absolutely having to have that new material in order to keep up production. True, there will be a gap in your ability to meet demand if everything stayed the same, but you're kind of counting on being able to fill that gap because you've got enough time with all those shoes stored in your warehouse. But we don't have that luxury anymore. There's virtually no warehouses storing anything. It's all stored in transit. And the expectation is that most of that stuff will dry up in about 12 days. Within 3 days, most of the interesting stuff that everybody needs, such as food, will be gone from that just-in-time system. That's going to create a huge social disruption here because people will be clamoring for relief. The government is incapable of doing it. All they can do is legislate and tax and spend money poorly. And they've been doing all of that at a very accelerated rate, siphoning off all the real wealth in the system, and it's not stored anywhere. So when the crisis comes, the government is going to be extremely ineffective. And for I don't know how long, the United States may resemble Argentina or some other less than stable social organization more than we will resemble the United States of the past. And it'll be up to all of us to put together and heal whatever it is we're going to face and come up with something new, because we won't be able to go backwards. And we're all going to have to adjust to the idea that we're 6% of the populace of the planet. We're going to have to only use 6% of the resources. And we'll just never go back to the days of even the 60s, but certainly not in the 70s and 80s. We'll never get to that level of consumption again, and to say nothing of the Walmart era. So under the circumstances, it's going to be a rough period of time, and I'm shocked that our data shows that we turn as rapidly as we do in July. I was expecting 18, 19 months of real hard struggle, with it being in doubt as to whether the revolutionary impulse would favor the populace surviving and coming out on top.
And you had something in there about 1 or 2 women finding something that's going to change the world, and it was hidden in plain sight.
Yeah, we get all these weird, I have to stop and say that we have this layer of detail in our archetypes that is relates to what we call immediacy data. The immediacy data really is those words that are prescient out only a few weeks at most, and we get more of those than anything. And it kind of goes with how we think about our processing, that really if we're picking up the psychic leaks coming out of people, and most people are not aware that they're psychic, they're probably also not aware that they're leaking out the information, and not being aware that they're psychic, they're not tuned to long-term psychic impressions, so they're leaking out immediacy data. And, they feel an impression of like, oh, who's going to call, somebody's going to ask me out to dinner or something like that. They can just have these impressions that are, for the most part, accurate. And we sort of pick up on those immediacy data, and we get a lot of detail levels there. It can be confusing because we have a tendency to pay attention to some subsets more than others, so we might miss a lot. But usually when we pick up on these personality things, they end up manifesting in some method or some fashion that is close to the language we use in describing them. So that having been said, we've gotten a lot of personality-related stuff coming out that seems to suggest that we're on the verge of a renaissance. And well, again, we're on the verge of that step from a class 0 civilization into a type 1, where we'll have some form of energy that will eliminate a lot of the problems that we're currently facing as a planetary species. And apparently, according to our data, we're about to get into a period of time. We think in November will be the first of these announcements that will relate to this. And at the core of it, there's a lot to suggest that there are female personalities involved at the very center of this. So it's kind of like we're sort of forecasting a female pair in the sense of like Watson and Crick, the discoverers of DNA, supposed discoverers of DNA, or at least the people that codified their understanding of it. And so we may be looking at that. We may be looking at a couple of women here that will announce something that all the rest of us should have been paying attention to all these years, and they just happen to, put it together.